Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of our lecture on due diligence in real estate development. In the previous lecture, we had the opportunity to look at 4 key topics. First, we considered the introduction and definition of due diligence. And then we looked at the functions and objectives of due diligence. We then looked at the processes of due diligence and then mentioned the different types of due diligence. Now, in this part 2 of the lecture, we are going to focus specifically on the types of due diligence. And here we're going to look at the details of each of the 4 types of due diligence we mentioned in part 1. So we'll be looking at legal due diligence, tax due diligence, financial due diligence, and technical due diligence. So let's jump into it. So starting with legal due diligence, we want to look at the purpose and the sources of information for legal due diligence. So let's start with purpose. Now, legal due diligence essentially looks at the legal dimensions of real estate transactions, and for that matter, real estate development. And here, the purpose of this type of due diligence is to provide legal security and certainty for the decisions that are to be made regarding the real estate development project. And indeed, legal due diligence has been thought of as the basis of all other types of due diligence, right? And that is because law informs human behavior as well as commercial activity. And so whether you're looking at financial due diligence, tax due diligence, or technical due diligence, there is some law that may be providing a basis for all of those types of due diligence. The second purpose for a legal due diligence relates to the limiting of the liabilities of the contracting parties, right? And this is very important because the legal due diligence process is something that will essentially influence the contract that relates to the conveyancing of a land for development. And so after a legal due diligence process, the information regarding issues like ownership of the land may be revealed in the process, and that would help to limit the amount of legal risk that each of the parties would face. Now, in terms of the sources of information for legal due diligence, very often and in many countries, public registers provide a primary source. The investor will usually want to know or ascertain the legal ownership of the land. So in law, there is a maxim which says that you cannot give out what you do not have. So someone who purports to sell land to you must be the owner of the land, else he cannot grant you any interest in that land. Any effort to grant you an interest in land, or to sell to you some land, or to lease to you some land, when that person does not have that interest, would amount to a void transaction. So in many jurisdictions, there are institutions that facilitate legal due diligence regarding the ownership of land. In the specific case of Ghana, you have the Lands Commission providing some basis and serving as a source of information for legal due diligence. So typically, prospective buyers of land for development would usually conduct a search of the ownership of that parcel of land at the Lands Commission. They may be given a site plan by the vendor, or they may have gone there and taken the coordinates of the subject land and gotten a surveyor to prepare a site plan for a search at the Lands Commission. And at the Lands Commission, the different divisions of the Lands Commission will be involved in conducting this search. The Lands Commission will usually search its land title registration or registers. It will usually search its land survey registers, and so on and so forth, with an attempt to identify the legal owner of the parcel of land in question. And for a very long time, that has been the formal way of searching for the title or ownership of land in Ghana. It is the case that the Lands Commission register, land register, does not cover every parcel of land in Ghana because of the low level of land registration or low level of land titling in Ghana. And so you would see that a vast number of lands, especially private lands, which in this case are stool lands, skin lands, family lands, and even lands owned by individuals have not been registered with the Lands Commission. And that becomes a hindrance to legal due diligence. Right. Sometimes it is also the case that some information may exist in the law courts of the Republic of a country. And this is because in Ghana, for instance, land issues constitute a major part of conflicts in the court or cases in the courts. And so another level of legal due diligence is to conduct a legal search or a search at the courts to find out if the land in question is a subject matter of litigation in the courts. And it is the case that many times, even though the Lands Commission may have granted title to a particular person, it is also the case that that same title may be the subject matter of contestation in the law courts, right? And so going to the court and examining the legal registers, land registers in the court would be a very useful process of due diligence. Now, it is also the case that in Ghana, for land to be registered in the land registers, the zoning of that land must conform to the zoning approved by the planning institutions, right? And so it is also important that as part of the legal processes, you engage with the legal, the planning institutions to ascertain the zoning of that land, right? And essentially the zoning of that land is the use to which that land can be put to. And it's usually determined by the district assemblies, the planning offices at the district assemblies. And so you'd want to visit those offices as well to ascertain the zoning of your land. Let's have a look at financial and tax due diligence. Now, financial due diligence and tax due diligence are two separate types of due diligence investigations. However, I have chosen to discuss them together because they are related. So, for example, financial due diligence may be affected by taxes, or the finances of a company may be affected by taxes, whereas the taxes of a company may be affected by its finances, right? So think about it. A company that is not doing very well financially, for example, a company that is making losses, may not be liable to pay taxes. However, if it is profitable, then it will be liable to pay taxes, right? And then again, the level of taxes that company pays would affect the financial position of that company. And for that matter, the financial viability of that real estate development activity, right? And so I consider the two together. Now, the purpose of a financial and a tax due diligence investigation are many and varied. So the first one is to generate information that will help to identify the financial risk connected to a particular parcel of land or a particular development activity. And the reason why this is important is two-pronged. So one is that we need to know these financial risks so that we can include them in the calculation of the purchase price, right? And then secondly, we need to know these financial risks so that we can cover them in the purchase agreement by way of specific tax indemnities or holdbacks. And here I can cite very interesting provisions in the laws of Ghana that are relevant in this instance. So for instance, when you look at the Land Governance Act of 2016, unpaid property rates, right, are outstanding claims that would have to be made, irrespective of how long those claims have existed, and irrespective of who at any point in time owns that property. So what this means is that if an investor buys a parcel of land without taking into account the outstanding property rates that the original owner of the property has failed to pay, then he, the new investor or the new owner of the property, will be liable for the payment of those outstanding claims, right? And so when an investor does a tax due diligence investigation, it will help that investor know the property rate liability position of that property. And that will form a basis of the negotiation he or she would have with a vendor, right? In some cases, the vendor may accept to deduct or to discount the price of the property to enable the investor settle the outstanding property rate. Now, the other example in Ghana has got to do with capital gains tax. So capital gains tax is a tax that is paid on any capital gain resulting from the sale of property. And in Ghana, the laws, the Income Tax Acts require developers and real estate investors to pay capital gains tax. But then they can avoid this tax if they reinvest the proceeds from the sale in another real estate venture. You get it? And so you can see that the financial position, by plowing back the proceeds from the sale of a real estate asset, would help to mitigate or reduce or help to avoid some form of tax liability, one way or the other. The other example I want to mention in this regard has got to do with interest expense deductibility. So Ghanaian law also enables prospective or mortgage holders to deduct their interest expense from their incomes before paying taxes. Okay, and so for a real estate development project that is financed using, say, a mortgage, the developer has the opportunity to deduct this interest expense before he pays taxes on the net profits. And so, to some extent, you can see the relationship between the financial dimensions of a real estate development project and the tax dimensions of a real estate development project. Another reason for conducting a financial and tax due diligence investigation is that it also helps to generate information that enables the developer to forecast the return on investment. And so this return on investment will actually be an assessment of the level of profitability of the investment. And so since taxes affect profitability, they would also help to determine the financial position of the development. And then the third reason why we conduct a financial and tax due diligence investigation is that it helps to provide information on the acquired asset or the company for legal and tax structuring of the acquisition. So let me give you an example of this. So an investor may choose, especially in a joint venture arrangement, may choose to use a special purpose vehicle to execute a real estate development project because the partner is may be facing financial problems that may affect the project if the project is not insulated from the individual companies that are going to operate that project. So let's say a company is in financial trouble. That company has borrowed money previously and is in financial distress. That company is unable to, service its debt obligations, and that inability to service debt obligations has the potential to significantly affect the performance of the company with regards to any new joint venture agreement with other development partners, right? And so the concerned partner may opt for a special purpose vehicle, which is a different entity in legal terms from the individual companies that have joined resources to execute a piece of real estate development. Now, the information generated from the financial and tax due diligence investigation can also help an investor determine whether to buy a real estate asset wholly or to buy just a share of the deal, right? And this is very, very crucial because of the fact that in many instances, the vendor has more information than the buyer. And so until you become a part owner of the company that is purporting to sell the property, you may not know the true financial health of the company. And so one strategy is to first start with a share of that company. So assuming you want to buy the entire company that runs that real estate entity, you start by buying a share of that company. And as a shareholder, you would have access to information regarding the true health of that company. And that would help you subsequently to make a decision about whether to buy a larger percentage of the company or to even reduce your share in that company. Now, it is also true that financial information and tax information affects the valuation of, say, the parcel of land that is needed to develop a piece of real estate. And so, still coming from the fact that vendors have more information than the sellers, than the buyers, it is important that this information difference or asymmetry is bridged. And so the financial due diligence and tax due diligence process enables the buyer to reduce the information asymmetry. So they get to know more about the financial position of the company. They get to know more about the rent levels of the property they want to buy, the kind of outgoings that the company usually accounts for, the vacancy levels, the cash flows, as well as the operational expenses that the company incurs, and as well as the net operating income that a piece of property is generating for purposes of appraisal and valuation, right? All of these, one way or the other, would affect the economic viability of the purchase or otherwise. And so you would say that the financial and tax due diligence process helps to generate information and materials to support a valuation exercise of the parcel of land or the parcel of a real estate that is due for some kind of development activity. And so it is essential that investors and developers conduct a financial and a tax due diligence process. And then the last type of due diligence I want to talk about is the technical due diligence. Now, this for a long time has been the main type of due diligence conducted by many real estate developers and investors. And it is based on the fact that the value of property is determined by what tenants are willing to pay for using the property. And that willingness is highly dependent on the utility they get from the use of that property, right? And this may be influenced by the characteristics of the property. So for instance, the location of property has been established to be a major determinant of value, largely because of the utility of different types of locations. The reason is that different types of locations are associated with different opportunities in terms of infrastructure and amenities, right? And so depending on the infrastructure and amenities requirements of a tenant, he may choose one location over the other. Now, the size of a building, the potential or opportunity to tailor space to the demands of the tenant, and of course, some other technical requirements, all would influence the willingness of a tenant to pay for a piece of property. And so since the 1970s, various investors have conducted technical assessments of properties. And these technical assessments usually focus on two aspects of the property. One, the structural stability of the property. And two, an assessment of the technical equipment that is operated in the building. So these technical equipments may be energy equipment, water equipment, heating and ventilation, AC equipment, and so on and so forth. And so you can easily infer from these two components of technical assessments during the 1970s that they were usually focused on the engineering and architectural dimensions of a building. Now, over time, we have realized that there are other aspects of buildings that are very important. For instance, there are environmental issues, such as the issues related to contaminated land or building contaminants that have recently become very popular as technical issues that need to be looked at. But historically, investors will usually conduct a separate environmental due diligence assessment in addition to the traditional technical due diligence assessment. And so fast forward, since the 1990s, scholars have thought of a way to integrate the traditional technical due diligence assessments and the environmental due diligence assessments in what is now commonly referred to as the environmental, social, and governance due diligence frameworks. In short, ESG, right? And these ESGs are essentially supposed to look at all the physical issues that relate to a particular building. And in some respects, some scholars would want to focus or think about this integration in the form of a technical, environmental, social, and then the governance dimensions of the development project. So for us in real estate development, a very simple approximation of the technical due diligence process, which addresses the environmental, social, and the governance issues in a development project, has got to do with the threefold framework for land use decision making, right? And this threefold framework looks at one, the physical and then the biological possibility or capability of the parcel of land to support the development activity the developer wants to carry out. And here, there are two key components of such an assessment. So the developer will usually consider the resource quality as well as the resource accessibility. So by resource quality, the developer will look at the size of the site for the development activity, the shape of the site, the topography, the soil type, as well as the water conditions. All of these are going to inform the design of the building project, for instance, right? And sometimes, especially with regards to soil type, it is going to inform the foundation that has to be developed to support such a project. Now, in terms of resource accessibility, the developer would usually look at issues of transportation and access to the site. The developer will determine whether there's easy access to the site or not. And if there isn't, and there might be a need to improve access to the site, all of that would contribute to the material cost of the development activity. And in addition to that, it will also determine the attractiveness of the site. Because if a site is not easily accessible and mobility is hindered, then it will become a less desirable site for many tenants and many investors. Now, in addition to the physical and then the biological capability assessments in the technical due diligence exercise, investors would also look at the economic and then the technological feasibility of the project. And here, a typical market analysis that enables a developer to understand the trends in the market becomes a very useful tool in the technical due diligence process, right? And so in a market analysis, the investor or developer wants to understand the demand and then the supply side issues. So issues relating to the factors that drive demand, like population, income levels, prices of houses, of land, etc. And then you may also be interested in looking at the factors that drive supply, like, for example, prices of real estate on the market and so on. And the essence of market analysis essentially is to determine whether there is a surplus or a deficit of the type of real estate that the developer wants to put up. And if there is a surplus, then that might be an indication that there isn't an opportunity in the market. But then if there is a deficit, then that could be a gap or an opportunity that can be explored further or refined into an opportunity for execution. Now, beyond the market analysis and the marketability assessments that a developer will do in order to know what factors drive demand for real estate projects, investors are primarily interested in the profitability of their projects, right? And so a technical due diligence process will utilize information from the market analysis to assess the profitability or the financial viability of the project. And that will be a key indicator of whether the project will continue or not. In addition to profitability assessments, developers will usually consider the technological feasibility of a project. So we can distinguish feasibility from viability in the sense that feasibility usually answers the question, can we do this project? So can the developer undertake this project given the level of technology existing in the country, right? And so even though a project may on paper look profitable based on assessments, or even look viable based on assessments, it may not be technically feasible to carry out such a project. So in Dubai, for instance, investors have been able to reclaim a part of the ocean and build on it. But then in countries like Ghana, even though that might be an opportunity for many investors, it's not likely that many of the typical types of developers you have in Ghana would want to engage in such a prestigious activity. And so such a project may not be technically feasible in Ghana, given the level of technology in there. And of course, the level of willingness by typical Ghanaian real estate developers to venture into such projects. And that may largely be because of the cost of developing such a project. And then the last part of the technical due diligence from the threefold framework for land use decision making has got to do with the institutional acceptability of the project. Now, we know that institutions essentially determine social behavior. And so there are different aspects of institutions that will either promote or limit the developer's projects or developer's activity. So here we can talk about legal provisions, either in the constitution of a country, either in acts of parliament or in ordinances, etc., that govern development projects, right? So for example, in many countries, there are building codes and regulations that guide what can be built and what cannot be built. There are planning regulations that influence the zoning of land for various purposes. And zoning could be in various forms. One in terms of land use and even height zone limits that developers have to comply with, right? Now, even though the building codes and regulations, as well as the planning regulations of a country may allow for a development, a particular development to be put up, politically, it may not be acceptable, right? It may not be acceptable. And so it is also important and vital that any physical development that developers want to undertake also satisfy political acceptability, right? The government, for instance, must be willing to support such a project. But beyond the legal or the formal institutional factors that influence real estate development projects in any country, there are cultures and social norms, attitudes and beliefs and value systems that influence development projects, right? Culture essentially is a way of life of people. And people, and that culture may specify that or may suggest that a certain type of real estate is preferred over another type of real estate. And so developers may have to design their projects to conform to that. Historically, the Social Security and National Insurance Trust has had problems selling off their flats. And that was because, and indeed there's some evidence to support the point that because a lot of people like to eat their fufu, you know, and it's very difficult to pound the fufu or prepare the fufu. If you leave, say, on the first, second, or third or fourth floor, then yes, because of that, many people do not want to buy, buildings that will cause them to live beyond the ground floor, right? So it's much easier to pound the fufu on the ground floor than to pound it, say, on the first or the second or the third floor. And so historically, that became a hindrance to the sale of SNIT flats or SNIT apartment projects, right? So that is an example of how culture can affect the viability of real estate projects. And then also, a project must be administratively workable. So in Ghana currently, I think the tallest building is Villaggio Alto. That building is about 27-story structure. And interestingly, I've heard of anecdotal evidence from very prominent scholars who suggest that we don't see a lot of tall buildings in Ghana because they are not administratively workable. So in many parts of the world, like Dubai, the United States, and other places, you see very tall structures, numbering well over 100 stories, but you don't have any in Ghana because, for instance, the Ghana Fire Service has consistently indicated their inability to quench fire beyond a certain height, right? And so if you are a developer who wants to put up, say, 100-story structure, apartment building or commercial building, that you would have to privately make provision for the mitigation of fire, because the National Fire Service may not be in a position to support such a project, right? So that is an example of how administrative issues can affect the type of real estate we see in the country. So in summary, All of these four due diligence types are necessary for real estate. And developers have to go through all of them to gather enough information to enable them make better decisions. Remember the legal principle that caveat emptor, that buyers should beware. And so due diligence is that process that facilitates this awareness, or that enables developers to gather enough information to inform their decisions. Yes. So in part 3, I'll look specifically at the legal due diligence processes in development land acquisition in Ghana. See you in part 3. Bye.